Welcome to Josh's House of Nerd podcast.
Hello, Nerd Nation. I'm Josh, and I welcome you to the podcast. Grab a cold evergreen gobble of blue milk and make yourself comfortable here at my House of Nerd. Now, today on the podcast, we are talking about a special topic today, something that is near and dear to our hearts and that we've been waiting for a really long time to come out. And today we're going to be talking about the 2021 movie Dune, directed by Denis Villeneuve, starring Timothée Chalamet, Zendaya, Rebecca Ferguson, Jason Momoa, Oscar Isaac, Stellan Skarsgård, Dave Bautista, Javier Bardem, James Brolin. I mean, it goes on and on. It's an amazing cast. And let's talk about this movie. When did you guys get a chance to watch it?
So we got to watch it Friday, and we watched it on HBO Max.
Okay.
And instead of going to the theaters, we had a good sound system, a good TV. So we, personally, like I decided it was better to do that instead of worrying about somebody playing on their cell phone in the middle of the movie and getting pissed off secretly at it. So at this point, I could pause the movie and go get a drink and use the bathroom if I really had to. So
heck yeah,
I was super happy with it. So we got to see it Friday. It released early on streaming, actually, on Thursday. It wasn't supposed to release till Friday, and then
I was surprised about that.
It was available Thursday. I almost called everyone up and said, "Hey, we should watch it right now because it's out." It required some self-control that's all of my self-control for the year. So I'm gonna probably gain a few pounds over Christmas, I'm sure, with all the goodies. But no, it was excellent. I absolutely loved it. I'm glad I got to see it and experience it. I guess is a good way of saying it. So
Josh, you went to the theater. What'd you think?
I did.
How was your experience?
I really thought the experience was great. One thing that was, just crazy. You mentioned the sound system and the theater definitely, had the theater sound system, and I'll be honest with you, it almost was too loud sometimes. Even though, it was amazing and, all encompassing, it was still sometimes a little overwhelming on how loud it was. But that's what you get, when you go to a theater sometimes, when you can't control the volume. Either I'm getting old and I just need to be get off my lawn and turn down your music and all that stuff. Start doing that kind of stuff.
I've heard that complaint, from some people, that this is definitely in the same territory as kind of the loudness that movies are now. Feels like they're all cranked up, and Tenet being the big one that everybody.
It's a big one. I was going to mention
about.
That one too.
Yeah, but I've seen some complaints about that for sure.
Yeah, it's a little droning at times. It's really soft at other times, really, really super loud in your big intense moments. And, the music's fine. It's just a matter of just being a little bit too cranked up sometimes.
The music's just fine, Josh?
Yeah. Hans Zimmer is just fine.
No, it was amazing. Yeah. Okay, it was amazing. He did just an amazing job.
The sounds he's able to pull out of a string bass, that's just fine. Don't worry about it.
I knew when I said it. I knew it was over when I said it. Because it's not my full intention of that. Because I was just anyway. Yes, it's better than just fine. It is an amazing soundtrack, and he did an incredible job with it and stuff. That would be of the whole soundtrack of that movie. I would just say it was a little loud, which again, was just because of it being in the theater.
So here's the thing. Here's the thing that I don't know if I have an issue with, so it's going to be hard to explain. I'm trying to think of it. So you watch Lord of the Rings, right? And you come away, the soundtrack well, and there's a definite theme. You think of Lord of the Rings music, and a lot of us can hear the theme in it. You think of Star Wars music, you can hear the theme, the big theme in it. I didn't feel like Zimmer's stuff in this had a theme to where I left it and oh, this is the theme of the film. This is the
No.
theme of the music. Did anyone else kind of get that same thing where it wasn't really, there was no unifying, harmonies or anything like that? No unifying thing in their music, or was that just me?
Uh,
Go
I
ahead,
haven't
Craig.
finished watching it a second time, but you're right. Like nothing really stands out. Like they don't have like character motifs. Like classic Star Wars. It's like you have a motif for each character, really.
Yeah,
And
yeah,
You do.
this, and even in like say Interstellar, right? There's several set piece motifs, right? Where it's like
oh, exactly.
this is the these are the repeated melodies or sounds that are done for that type of thing. Um, I think this was going more for like a
Almost atmospheric,
yeah. I would say
and
it's
I'm okay with that. I think.
yeah. I think it's closer to it like Inception, where it's not really about like melody. It's more along the lines of like a sound, right? Like the
Right.
combination of drums and low strings, and then kind of the slightly Arabic sounding, vocal parts and stuff like that. That's the sound of this movie. It's not really like a melody.
Yeah, and I think I'm okay with that because I think this is a film where I don't want the music to overshadow the film, like the cinematography, the character acting, like all that. I think the music did a fantastic job of doing its job. Like I am setting the tone, I am helping you feel what the director wants you to feel, and then after that, I'm getting out of the way. I am not here to like screw around or do anything like that. And so it's one of those things where I'm like, okay, I noticed its absence, but I don't have an issue with it. I
That's a
think
good
it
point.
did
You say
a good
I
job.
don't. I'm not bothered by it though. Like not having that. It
Well,
did bring like you did feel it made you feel tense when it needed to be, and it was lighter where it needed to be, and
and
in
you
the
see
situations.
films where they try too hard. Like the Marvel Cinematic Universe is an excellent example of that, where they've tried too hard in a lot of the recent films to build this motif that's constant through all the Marvel films. Like this is the Marvel soundtrack, this is the Marvel theme, and it's tried so hard it kind of gets in the way of things, in my opinion. And that can be a whole nother discussion, I'm sure, on movie soundtracks
I
and
mean, if they're doing,
motifs.
if they meant to make a soundtrack that's like maybe someone could hum, which they did, or think about and get something out of it that way. Sure, they've done it, but I don't believe that was the intention of this movie. I think, and said it, very much so of what it was supposed to be. It's more atmospheric. I think you said it too. It's more atmospheric. It was just meant to be the soundtrack of the movie and
Mhm.
not and
but
enhance
but
it.
man, was it good. It
Oh
was
yeah, it was
so well
amazing.
done.
I wonder, like, it's making me think right now. Is it something to do with, so like, Star Wars is a really simple story. Like when you get down to the plot, right? It's not very
Mhm.
complex. It's definitely, outside of like the prequels, it's not a whole lot of complicated politics and stuff like that. So I'm wondering if like simple memorable motifs help in a more like kind of simple story, and
Simple
then when the
theme.
story is really complex they wanted the music to reflect that and not be so graspable, because I mean that's kind of the hard part about doing a Dune movie, a Dune story, is that it is incredibly political. It's incredibly it's political, it's complex compared to most movies and most plots. And I wonder if the music is kind of set in the same way, and that it's a little more complex, it's a little less, straightforward and exactly in your face. This is what's happening. I don't know.
It's definitely in your face. No doubt about that. But I think only where I feel like only where it needs to be in your face. Emphasizing some of those big, huge, like amazing, attack
Yeah,
scenes that happen like on Arakeen.
yeah. I guess what I mean
But
by in your face is
Harkonnen.
like hummable,
Oh,
right? It's
okay.
like it's obvious. Like the melody is obvious and it's attached to a specific scene or a specific
Obviously.
character. It's obviously this is the music for this part. Whereas in I don't, at least in the first and a half 1.5 watches I've done so far, it's not something I'm paying attention to as much. Like I like its impact. I like the textures and the choices that they're making. I think they're really interesting, but it's not, you know it's not memorable in the sense that I'm going to be humming it the next day. Like it's not going to stick in my head like a pop song.
Exactly.
It's more along the lines of like I don't know, a progressive
And-
rock
and-
song or something like that, where you're not really humming the melody, you're just enjoying it while you listen to it.
Exactly. And I'm okay with that. Like I
Yeah.
said, I think it was the right choice for the film.
If you think about it, though, too, guys, can you really hum the old Dune soundtrack?
I can't even remember it.
Yeah.
Kinda.
No, the one from Lynch you could totally do. You could totally
Okay.
do. I'm not going to
but
do it.
could
I'm
you
a
think of
terrible
it right
hummer,
now? I mean, like, I
Yeah.
know you've seen that movie a million times. A
No,
little
I-
bit.
No, come on. That score by Toto is straight up rocks.
Okay.
And it is super memorable. Especially compared to this movie.
Okay.
I think this movie is
Good point,
less
good point.
memorable
I'd forgotten
than,
that was like one
than
by
Toto
Toto.
and Brian Eno doing, Lynch's.
I was just thinking of more of like the electronic, yeah.
Well, I mean, the melodies, yeah, like I was saying, is like the melody for Zimmer's stuff, at least the stuff that I'm recalling right now, is mostly vocal and then drum, kind of percussive.
Yeah.
And that isn't going to lend itself to hummable, pop like, But I think
No.
the. Oh, what happened?
Nothing.
Oh, you said no. Okay, sorry.
No, I was agreeing. I was like, I was agreeing with what you were saying.
Yeah. Okay. Gotcha. No, I think that's a, I don't know. I do think Lynch's the soundtrack to Lynch's movie is way more memorable than this one. At least the next day, like it stuck with me, as opposed to this one.
Yeah. I can see that. Now that I think about it a little bit more.
I like the texture in this one better. Like I think this, like I said, I think this is more of an interesting listen during the movie. I think it's more complex than what they put in Lynch's movie. But yeah, I don't. Yeah, it's not really something that you're going to be like humming the next day.
No, definitely not.
Which,
What
like
stood
John
out to you
said,
guys in
is
this
totally fine.
Yeah,
With
absolutely fine.
What else stood out to you guys in this movie? What are some of the takeaways that you guys liked about this movie?
We start from the beginning.
Let's see.
Or
The
whatever you
dream.
want.
Well, I love how they give you that whole dream subtitle, and then it goes into the Warner Brothers logo. It's like, wait,
I did like
is this
that
a
too.
dream about Warner Brothers? Like, I'm a little confused already. No, but I think speaking of confusion, from the moment the film started to it till it ended, I think it did the job of explaining the story and the universe and the subtleties extremely well. And I've heard that from other people that have seen it that haven't gotten into Dune. My sister watched it and she's never watched Dune. She's never read Dune, and she said she was able to follow the story and stay along with it. So I think
that's wonderful.
what stood out to me was in the 2.5 hour runtime that they had, they were able to clearly build this universe and make you care about these characters and help you understand what's going on, at least well enough to where you don't have to be a Herbert scholar to understand what's happening.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think at least on the first watch, I managed to do the thing where I avoided all the PR for this once I knew that Villeneuve was doing it. And so I every reveal of a character and the actor that's playing them was a really delightful surprise. Like it was just really nice to be like, oh, Jason Momoa's in this. I didn't know that. That's great. And it's just like going into, every character reveal. I was like, oh, that's cool. Like, I don't know. I'm really pitching the idea of less trailers.
I would agree with you. I think it definitely doesn't help. The more and more I was watching, when I was watching in the theater, they had the preview for the new Matrix movie,
Mm-hmm.
and I'm thinking to myself, are they showing too much? Because I feel like they're showing too much.
Well, I haven't seen it, so and I'm going to try to.
And I'm not saying like, hey, agree with me. I'm just saying that
Right.
was my feelings when I saw that, because they are showing so many different scenes. You can tell they're all, different times and stuff. They showed a lot of the movie in that little time.
Right.
And I know they're trying to get you hyped up and excited about it, but still, sometimes it's just a little bit too much.
Well,
Yeah.
it's the argument that marketing is generally in charge of these trailers in a lot of cases, and so they're like, screw the directorial direction or whatnot. So they could change the tone of the movie, they could give away too much of the movie, they could ruin reveals that movies build up to. So I've seen that happen a lot of times. One of my all time favorite examples of that would be the trailer for the movie Contagion. And the trailer for Contagion makes it seem like one of the zombie flicks. It makes it seem super high action, like just drives this home. And then what you actually get is basically COVID pandemic in a movie. And
Right.
it's a good movie. I really enjoy it. But I went into it with such different expectations because the trailers were so far off of what the film is. And
Mhm.
that happens more often than not.
Yeah. I really, I guess. So definitely getting into like the reveals of the actors was a nice kind of outside the movie surprise to see who they chose for each character. And then I just, man, I love that kind of stoic, blocky artwork that this film has. Like, that's just really cool to me. I mean, it's cold. It's um, it's not colorful. It's not Hodorowski's Dune, but
No.
and it's interesting because it feels like he really married like the story with some of Lynch's aesthetics, right?
Yeah,
Yeah, he
I
did.
agree.
And he even
And
mentioned that he took a little bit. There's definitely aspects of it that he really liked from it that he did grab.
Okay,
and
yeah, that makes
and
sense.
I think he captured what I feel is what I kind of refer to as a half fallen empire in the sense that the human race has forgotten a lot of things from where they came from. If you read the book, the Orange Bible is a good example of that. And then the fact that they're so advanced yet so simple in a lot of things, I think they captured that so well in the film. Everything had a lot of it felt like simple lines. There wasn't a lot of clutter in the film. There wasn't a lot of like clutter of things in the film. The barracks were very sparse. The rooms were generally sparse. I mean, they were somewhat decorated, obviously, but it wasn't like ridiculously crazy. I think the most clutter I saw in one scene was the breakfast scene in the morning with, and then the very beginning scene with Rebecca Ferguson and Timothy Chalamet. That breakfast was like the most extravagant part of the scene. Other than that, I think he captured the scarcity of Arrakis, and then the whole we are a super advanced race that can travel across the stars, yet at the same time, like we are very pretty simple in what we can do or what we have for everyday life. I don't know if that makes sense.
Yeah, I mean
Yeah.
that is Dune. I mean they are very technologically advanced, but it's not in anything to do with because of computers. I think they got that across really well. You know,
When,
I almost wanted them to go and explain a little bit more, about the mentats, and they left out anything to do with explaining what they are, where they come from. I don't know if it's missing much from it. Like in the original movie, they talk about how the juice of Safu and all that stuff enhances them, and that's why they have in this movie they didn't have the red lips like they do in the book
Well,
because of the stains of the juice.
they do have the tattoo from the stain though.
They
So if you look at their lips, they do have a tattoo on the bottom lip, which is probably supposed to
they
be
do have a
representative of
tattoo.
the stain.
Yep.
So,
I
but
wonder if that's a similar idea.
I think it's smart they didn't go into it. I think
uh,
one of the pitfalls of Lynch's Dune is that they went in and had to do a lot of exposition, and they felt like they had to do a lot of exposition.
So
well,
you don't
And
think so? Your sister, you
this
said your sister watched it,
my sister watched it. I'm sure she has questions, but
but she didn't
it
like feel like
it
totally
didn't
left
screw
out
up the story. No,
because there
it didn't.
wasn't as much of a download
Exposition. Yeah.
exposition. Because there is exposition, but I think they did it in a smart way, and sometimes they do it it's very subtle in some of the ways that they're showing things off, and I was like really surprised on how subtle sometimes it was. He got his point across, but yet you still understood what was going on.
Yeah, I kind of don't know what you guys are talking about. The whole first half of the movie is nothing but exposition.
It is
Yeah,
exposition, but
Nothing but exposition.
yeah,
it's not.
but
It's in a different way, though.
Well, I hear they're
It's
not
not
doing
like
voiceover and
Yeah,
everything
that's
else from the
and
first
that's
movie.
I
But
should say that voiceover exposition
okay,
that kind of Lynch fell into.
okay, because
Yeah,
this is a slow burn movie. I mean,
Yeah, because it's a part one. It's building up.
well, yeah,
Everything
and I
in
wanted
this
to get
movie
to
is a build.
and I wanted to get to that because it's a 2.5 hour part one, and I don't know. There's some things they chose to leave out, like leaving out the mentets and everything like that. It's like, okay, I can kind of see that because you can tell the story kind of without them being explained, right?
Yeah.
Well, they showed what they did, where he
Right.
asked him to do a calculation, and he just did it real quick. Yeah.
So one
And he
issue that I
rolled
was
his eyes
thinking,
back.
yeah. One issue I could think about was how they didn't explain, and maybe they'll do it in the next
Folding
movie if we
space?
get a next movie. No, not so much folding space, more Dr. Yue. He is central to this entire plot, and they didn't do hardly anything. Well, you don't get any backstory. You don't have any of his motivation.
Did-
And
And speaking of that, they didn't even bring him in like the original movie or even the book about how there was a potential spy in the palace. That whole and then if you remember in the book also, then it countered to, well, is the spy Jessica? They didn't even play any of that plot in this movie.
right.
I don't think they had the time.
They had 2 hours and 30 minutes.
I know, but they filled it with everything else. And honestly,
But UA's central to
yes,
what
no, I'm
happened.
not arguing the UA thing.
Okay.
I'm arguing the plot, like the whole the Lady Jessica portion of it, especially.
Okay. Yeah, I could
I
see them
think
shelving
UA.
that.
I can see them needing maybe a little more build up for UA, having them a little more prevalent before the big reveal of the betrayal and all of that. I can see that, and I can agree with that.
Yeah, that's the weird part. At least for a person who's read the books or seen the previous movie, that's the weird part for me. When I keep thinking back to it, because they're treating it
In
like
the
it's
book,
something
oh,
that.
man.
Well, I'm saying that in this movie, they're treating it like something that's going to be a huge reveal if we get a part 2, right? Like they're not giving us any backstory. They're not even really seeing UA do most of the actual things, right? It's like who it is in the background if you know that UA is the issue, is the traitor, but you don't. They don't actually confirm it by showing him on screen doing it, right?
Mm-hmm.
Right, and so
The
you don't get any.
It's just
The only
exposition.
time they confirm him being the traitor is when they
when
bring
he
him,
cuts. Yeah, when they bring him in front
brings
of
him in front of the hard comment. Yeah.
right, and you're just like, okay, I don't know. It feels like he was not central to the story, and I feel like he is central to the story, but I don't. I mean, here's the thing: if they're going to tell a much bigger story, like if they go beyond I don't know if they go beyond the first book, probably, or at least get into the last part of the book, and really go there, maybe with 3 or 4 movies, then I can see the way they treated UA makes a little more sense because he's only central to this smaller beginning. He's not central to the whole thing.
Mm-hmm. And he really is. He's central to the beginning, but after the beginning, he's gone. I mean, he's dead for one.
Yeah, he's the catalyst. Yeah,
exactly. He's the catalyst, and as the catalyst, you'd expect a little bit more time. But here's the thing: maybe there was enough time on it, and it's just our previous knowledge of both Lynch's Dune and the book to where we feel that way too. Because that's something we're all coming into this, all 3 of us, with a lot of preconceived notions and ideas and knowing the story. And like me, I don't know how many times you guys have read the book, but I've read it at least 15 or 20 times at this point.
I haven't read
and
it
so I've come into it knowing like all this stuff.
We probably should have started off the podcast with like okay, what's your background with Dune? What's with your background with Dune? So that anybody who's listening to this isn't like, what are these guys talking about? Like, where are they coming from? Yeah, I think that's
I think I've read the book
I mean, it is
three
House
times,
of Nerd. Come on.
Yeah.
their
Yeah.
expectations should be set by the title, but
So
who knows?
so I'm thinking, to myself, and after talking to my sister pretty extensively of her experience with it, that maybe it was just fine. Maybe it was okay, and it did its job well enough to make sure that everyone was on the same page, and they still cared about the characters they needed to care about. Going back to the mentats for just a second, they explained just enough about the mentat, gave just enough, like, oh, they did calculations in their head, okay, there must be important that way, like, but they did just enough to make you care about the character and nothing else, and didn't need to do anything else. And maybe they didn't need to, like, we want more because we know there's so much more.
That's
But
certainly
somebody
possible.
coming in, it's enough, and it keeps them and helps them enjoy the film enough, if
Mhm.
that makes sense.
I think the whole Yui thing, I think the choice possibly that he made to do that was, I think both of you kind of hit on it, in my opinion, was, yeah, you can get past this scene pretty fast. You can get past this whole huge part without, doing a lot, so that I can move on to the bigger parts that I do really want to show. And
Yeah.
even though you're right, it does feel a little weird leaving the whole setup of, them getting the message from, intercepting a message from the Harkonnens, of a spy, and then them suspecting it's Jessica, and then they're kind of waiting for it, and then it turns out to be Dr. Yui. Yeah, that's sure they could have done that, and then really a lot of that, all in my opinion, is always set it up to show mistrust of Jessica.
And I don't
of their
and I don't
feelings
know
of
that
her.
we need that. I
And
don't think
that's what
we
I'm
need the
saying, is I
mistrust
don't
of
think you
Jessica.
need it either.
Yeah.
Like, it's kind of a fun. It's it's part of the book. It's a plot point that's definitely made there, but it is there and gone, because the main point of it is basically them escaping, getting out of the desert, and him finding out truly who he is.
Yeah, and especially when none of the main characters, like really none of the main characters, except for maybe Thufir Hawat, but he's not a main character in especially in this Dune. He doesn't play a super prevalent role. None of those characters in the book, especially, really had any of those misgivings about Jessica to begin with. So none of the characters that we're supposed to care about or are following would have and did have those mistrusting like feelings. Paul obviously has mixed feelings with his mom, anyways. But I mean, Leto was like super trusting. Duncan was Duncan. I mean, Duncan's Duncan. Gurney was maybe the only one in the book that was kind of like, oh, it must be Lady Jessica type deal. But so I think it's like, I'll defend it, but I definitely think it was fine leaving it out, and I think they did a fantastic job with it.
Yeah, like I said, that was like the only thing that when I think back on, I'm like, that's weird that they didn't do more with UA. But yeah, I'm convinced that it's a secondary plot to what they actually wanted to tell. Like, it's more about Paul's ascension. This movie is more about Paul's ascension than Atreides' fall.
Yes,
absolutely.
And that's a different. I think that's a different take than probably Lynch's, because Paul's ascension in Lynch's movie is very quick at the end. Like, he's just
absolutely.
Like, he's the leader, then he's the thing, then he's the God King. It's like he just
like
it's
not
quick.
It's not quite montage.
Right, it's not quite montage.
It's almost there. That's how fast it felt.
Yeah, I did want to ask one question though. Like, how do you feel about like the abandonment of the internal monologue, since it's such a huge part of the book, and the voiceover work for Lynch's was basically the way he handled it, and it seemed like Villeneuve was just like, yeah, we're not going to do that.
I can tell you from my point of view, but I don't know if I could speak for somebody else who is external to, I already know the books, I already know the movies, and I didn't miss him. I got to be honest, I didn't. But I don't know. I can't speak for someone who's just coming into the movie who doesn't know what's necessarily 100% going on, and seeing if that's like a different thing. I think he did in his actions and the way that was directed, pointed out the things that people needed to know, for the movie to progress,
and
for the story to progress.
I think they would be out of place in this film. Honestly.
Absolutely.
I think it would be absolutely out of place. Now, I'm not going to argue that we aren't losing something maybe by not having these internal dialogues. I think there could, there's definitely power in knowing the thoughts and having kind of this behind the scenes view of each person in each scene, but that's sometimes best left in the realm of books and not necessarily film. I don't think it
Name
would have
another
worked.
film that does it like Lynch's movie did. Can you name one that's like the thoughts? There's very few of them that did it that does it that way. It's
Yeah,
so
I
it's
think
so out there.
I think it lends to like kind of the atmospheric nature of this current movie, right? It's like
Hmm.
there's more quiet moments, less, I guess the mugging for the camera is more cinematic and less let's give time for the voiceover to finish, type thing.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, exactly. So yeah, I think they would be out of place in this film if they did it. So I'm
Yeah,
glad they didn't.
coming back to like things that I enjoyed about the movie, like the one of the things I told John as soon as we got out, because Josh and I had watched a couple episodes of Foundation the previous night, and I just went, I needed this. Like I needed this type of story and
Yeah.
sci-fi. It was just like a nice breath of fresh air after watching the Foundation series so far, and I was just like, this is. I mean, it's hard to compare budget wise and everything else to the two, but still, hard sci-fi based on beloved books and series, and the way that it's handled obviously is so much better. I'm not saying that Foundation would have ever been as good as much production is put into this Dune movie, but it was such a nice thing to watch this and be very happy with the output.
Well, it goes back to what we were talking about, the other day of high sci-fi, high
Mm-hmm.
science fiction. Foundation's trying to do that, but it's trying to do Star Wars at the same time.
Right.
And whereas this one was following what should be followed. It's following the politics. Yeah, there are harder topics. There are harder sometimes things to follow. Which Foundation should be doing the same thing, because the books are more political and they're more about the fall of that
Mm-hmm.
civilization. And this one's is more about the coming of age and the passage of Paul, from a 15-year-old kid to the leader of the known universe.
Right.
And that's the story that they're telling here. And that's and I think he's handling it like he should. He's not necessarily dumbing it down, whereas I feel like with the Foundation they're like diluting it like hardcore to try to appease multiple fan bases.
Yeah.
And I'm not saying that, Villeneuve didn't do that a little bit, here, but I can't really name something specifically that he would have diluted to make it, maybe a couple of plot points, maybe a few descriptions of things more in depth, like we were talking about with the Mentats and all
There
that stuff.
was there was nothing so controversial in his adaptation that I was like, man, why did he do it this way? The only thing that was interesting, but not controversial to me, and those that find it controversial, I think, have other issues, was the gender bending of Dr. Liet Kynes. They cast
I,
a female, and they made Liet Kynes a female in this versus the book where he's a male, and the father of Chani, which is something later in the books. So that was the only moment where I'm like, oh, that's an interesting take on the adaptation. But it wasn't controversial. I don't think there was any other thing in this film that was a controversial, like,
no.
you know,
As a
potentially
matter of fact, I
alienating
think that
fan
was a great
bases.
change. That's one of the changes where people throw a fit and like, oh, they're gender changing. Then you watch it, and this one, and I'm like, that really, if she did a great job, that actress is amazing, and it doesn't feel like they modified the story in any way. Maybe even enhanced it a little bit, finding to Liet Kynes being a woman versus a man. I mean, to be the wife, um, or to be the mother of Chani. They don't mention that at all in this, but I'm guessing that that's where they're going with it
It
still.
it'd be easy to do. This is not the hardest,
No,
adaptation part, and it's like, um, yeah. I mean, I don't think it's necessarily like a hard change to make.
no.
It's just I wouldn't get the controversy around it. I just wouldn't understand it. So,
I
I
I
think it's
remember it being
fine.
a little bit like controversial at first, and then
Before
I
the movie
haven't
came
heard
out,
about
when everybody's just
it.
questioning it without seeing it, yeah, I don't care
Yeah,
about them. I
Yeah.
don't care
no,
about them.
and that's the thing. That's they were questioning it then, but without seeing it. But now, I mean, I haven't heard anything about it honestly,
Yeah,
in ages.
it is opening weekend though. We'll see
Well,
what
it's
happens.
opening weekend, and then it is a small character.
It's
To
a
be
small
to be
part, yeah.
honest, in the movie, in
Yeah,
the books, it's a slightly larger, and it's a little more prevalent and overarching. And we'll see how they do it in the movies. But it might be a Doctor Yue situation where they did
it's not as
enough to
important. Yeah,
exactly. They have a bigger story they want to tell. They have bigger things they want to focus on, and they're gonna give you everything you need to get to the next parts in there. Without
right.
it feeling like a Deus Ex Machina ending or something like that.
Yeah,
Um,
you don't need to know about the Mentats to get Paul's ascension. You don't need to know about Yue's past deeply to know about Paul's ascension. You don't need to know about Kyne's gender to know about Paul's ascension.
No,
So,
yeah,
and I think they
exactly.
really focused on the ascension part, which for a film that makes way more sense than trying to cover everything. I
Well, and
think.
especially a part one film too, where they're
Yeah,
building this
about
up.
that.
I Go
Are
ahead.
we getting a part two? Because it's in
I think
question.
so.
Because they haven't
I think
started
it's
filming it, as far from what I understand.
I think
no,
it's
but they pretty much came out. I was reading an article yesterday that even though it's not official, they've pretty much told Villeneuve that. I mean, this is from them, the Warner Brothers, that it's pretty much a done deal because they had a lot of reporters reaching out to him,
Yeah,
even
but
though it's not official yet.
I think it
yeah,
would have to bomb and do less than half of its budget
dude,
in
his
order to make
last,
sense.
Which it has,
all of
it's
his
actually
movies have
exceeded it.
bombed. All of his
That's
movies previous to this have been box
have
office
bombed in the box of
bombs.
bombs. That's
Yeah,
true.
Guys,
yeah,
at last
That's
I
true.
looked at like what they're expecting right now, what they think it's at this moment. The budget was 165 million, and it's at 220 million on early estimates.
yeah. But that's estimates. That's like calling the
Yeah,
presidential election
I'll-
before any of the votes have come in.
It had
I
already
don't.
Are
got.
we going to have a Stop the Steal event? I guess.
Yeah,
With
probably.
The thing about it is,
give
though,
us
is it
Dune
already made
Part
its
2.
budget back before it even hit the United States. Is what I'm trying to say. It only made it's they're predicting that so far up until the beginning today this morning, it made 40 million. So
Yeah, but
it had
Hollywood
made,
is absolutely stupid with their expectations.
It's all
They're probably
publicity.
expecting this to be like
Yeah.
3 times the budget. So if you're
Yeah.
not making 3 times the budget, I don't know if you're going to get one, you know. And
I
I think we
I'm
are.
just saying, like, I want to be pleasantly surprised, but right now, until we know for sure, I'm just like, it's still up in the air. Like,
yeah.
Stephen King got it part 1 and part 2 greenlit, and they just went at it. Like, there was no question that a number 2 wasn't going to come out. It didn't matter what number 1 did, right?
Mhm.
And
Really, I
whereas
heard.
Dune's
I
not
read a
the same.
different article saying it wasn't guaranteed.
Really? Okay.
When the first one was done,
Gotcha. Well, I might have gotten the wrong information from what I was
because they
looking
were
at.
comparing it to this one. This is that article I was telling you about.
Mhm.
That it was like saying like is it a possibility? And they asked Warner Bros. And you're like, what do you think? That was literally their answer. What do you guys think? And stuff. And really, they came into this with low expectations. There's like, okay, if it's weak at the box office, which it hasn't been, it's exceeded what they thought it would do at the box office.
No, we don't know that for sure. Again, that's all estimates, though.
It's estimates.
What
they were talking about is not the U.S. market. It's exceeding expectations before the U.S. market opened. So it exceeded expectations in like Italy and all of Europe where it was released. That's what they were talking about when they were talking
I guess
talking
it
about this.
I'd like to feel that it's too big to fail.
Yeah,
But at the same
that would be
time,
really
like
nice. But I
it's
can't.
big to me, and I don't
Yeah.
know if it's going to be what I hope would happen would be like the splash that Lord of the Rings Part 1 made, where people went out and got the books and read the books, and like it was this big deal, and it just slowly built up. And by the time the next film came out, like it was huge and just stayed big. That's what I'd hope would happen.
What Warner Bros. Are
Whether or
saying
not
though is if even if it didn't do, if the reports came
Yeah,
back and they were not
unless
great,
that's in a contract in writing, though, executives can change
they
their
were
mind in a
really
heartbeat.
going to lean heavily on HBO Max. they were saying that it's not dead if the returns at the theater is bad. That they're also going to judge it off of ratings of HBO Max, which you were contributing to that.
But you gotta see where they're at too, because go ahead.
I love your optimism, Josh, and I hope you're right, but I can't.
I know you guys are being like completely the downers on
this.
And I'm
no,
going,
I don't. I'm not being a downer. But I've got to be realistic with it, because
the devil's advocate on this.
Of course, the executives and of course the marketing is going to say, "Oh yeah, there'll be a part 2. There'll be a part 2." And as long as it does well, there'll be a part 2, because they don't want to say it's so wishy-washy and everyone's like, "Well, why am I going to go see part 1 if part 2 is not going to come out?" So of course they're going to say that. So I'm trying to be optimistic, but
they pulled part 1 off the promotional material. None of it said part 1. You only know it's part 1 when you see the opening credits, right? Mm-hmm. That itself tells me that they're not 100% on board, because if they're 100% on board, they're already filming part 2, and they would have left part 1 on the posters, but they didn't do that. And here's the thing: you speak to anybody at an executive for an opening movie, it is the greatest thing that Hollywood has ever done, according to them, and it always will be. They'll never give you any reason to doubt that they're going to move forward. So whoever they is that this article is quoting, I don't believe them yet till things are filming, until they put it out. I'm hopeful, but I'm not going to rest. I'm not going to be on the hype train for it. There's at least a possibility, that we won't get a part 2,
which would be a shame. And I think we can all agree to that. Like we're not saying that, oh no, it doesn't deserve a part 2. It would be a crying shame if this didn't get a part 2 and we didn't get a finished vision and story.
If they take this to a part 7 and really get deep into Dune lore, I'd be happy with that. With this aesthetic, I would just be like, this is the greatest thing ever. But
the God Emperor of Dune, and
but
you want to talk about a movie that's damn near unfilmable, in my opinion.
Well,
and they thought Dune was unfilmable,
and they thought Lord of the Rings was unfilmable.
Well, that's true too. They haven't read God Emperor of Dune.
It takes a lot of smart people, a lot of smart, talented, skilled, experienced people working together to bring these things up. And we've seen that with Lord of the Rings. We've seen that with other adaptations that are fantastic. And I think Dune, even if we don't get a part 1 or part 2, Dune part 1 will go in as, in my mind, the best adaptation out of all of it. Like to me, it is just a fantastically well done film.
You feel that way even though the story's not complete?
Absolutely. I mean, I hope for the complete story, and I want there to be a complete story, but I'm not going to judge this film based on where they decided to end it, especially if the vision included a part 2, and considering how well done part 1 was. Like, I'd be a little more hesitant if I didn't feel like part 1 did as good as it did, I guess. Right. But it's a fantastic film. I absolutely I'm floored with it. I love it to death.
So go ahead, Rick.
Oh, I was just thinking, wasn't there like some controversy around Villeneuve's stance about the streaming platform release? Like he didn't want it at first or something like that?
Yeah.
There was.
I can't. He's gonna have to. I know that he wants his vision does deserve a cinematic release. I'm not saying it doesn't, but he's got to let people watch it where they are. Like you can't pull a Nolan and try to strong arm people into watching it in the venue that he wants them to watch it in. That's not how modern day works. And also, you just can't do that with everybody.
Well, his biggest complaint was it wasn't that it was necessarily streaming. What it was the whole thing we were just talking about. If this goes to streaming, is that going to take away the revenues that I was told that he was told that he had to make to get a part 2? That's what he was most concerned about in the articles that I've read about it.
So he didn't have any issue with people watching it at home, other than he thought that wouldn't count towards the revenue or something.
Yeah, that was his biggest beef on it.
Yeah, and I can kind of understand that fear, but at the same time, like the directors and studios and stuff have to get used to the new paradigm. I think this is the new
Yeah.
paradigm, and I think avoiding it and trying to, push only for cinematic, or at least cinematic and not a rapid release to streaming services after, with even with a premium price. If you don't adapt to that, I think you're going to suffer. And you're, like you said, we need to make films for where people are at.
Oh, he's going to push
And
people to piracy, essentially.
exactly,
Because
and so it's going to hurt his bottom line anyways.
yeah, it's going to hurt his bottom line anyway.
So I think, if they're not careful, we're already seeing piracy. And this is completely anecdotal, but I think we're already seeing piracy maybe increase because of the fracturing of streaming services. People want ease of use, and it used to be easy, and now it's not. It's just fracturing. So that's a whole nother controversy that could probably take a whole nother podcast at some point in time and some show. But I can see Villeneuve's hesitancy with that, especially if he feels like it's going to affect the chances for part two. I don't know that it will, especially since Warner Brothers owns the streaming platform it's on and has access to all the same stats, and their access to the revenue stream is not fettered by deals with Netflix or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't think it's going to be as big of an impact as he thinks it might have been.
Yeah,
I hope not.
I agree. I agree with that and stuff. But that's it is a concern. And the other thing was, it was brought up of why this is so. I think if I remember right, this is the last movie they're going to be doing for this year. That is they're releasing on HBO Max. If I remember right, I could be wrong. Maybe there's one more, but this is the last major one. So, and I think he was a little butthurt that this was, on the back end of all of that.
Mm.
Well, I don't think it's really on the back end. I think they're going to start to do more, especially if they see a good return on Dune, seeing how many people stream and go to the theaters. Especially with the pandemic still in full swing. Again, that's maybe a controversial statement, but we have other issues. I think I would hope that they see that and realize, okay, this is something that we can utilize, that we can, take advantage of, and make it easier for all of us that don't really necessarily enjoy the theater experience.
Right. It definitely helps out the people. I mean, I'm going to be honest with you. If this had been almost any other movie, I probably would have sat home and watched it at home as well. I mean, if this hadn't been like one of my favorite books of all time on the big screen, I wanted to see it at the theater. But anything else, there's been quite a few movies that have come out on HBO Max that I haven't seen, necessarily on streaming, and there's a few I have. I've paid for the HBO Max just to have it, and it's nice to have that option, because I didn't go see Black Widow or Shang Tsung at the theater. I want to see them, but I didn't go out to the theater. I usually wait for them to either go to the cheap theaters or I come out on Blu-ray, unless it's something I'm really, 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 cranked for, like a Guardians of the Galaxy or something like that. But I'm a bit choosy about what I go see in the theater, and HBO Max kind of helps out with that a little bit, or some of the other ones that are doing the movies. I totally agree that it's a very viable thing, and it needs to be, there needs to somehow become a mix of it to allow people to,
I did
if
find
they want to see it, fine. If they don't want to see it, they can still see it at home, and not go out.
I did find Villeneuve's take on streaming, and he said he did it in Variety. He said streaming can produce great content, but not movies of Dune's scope and scale.
Okay.
Yeah, and I disagree with him on that.
Yeah, I mean, have you seen home setups? I mean,
I've got the sense of scale and whatnot from Crit's place. I mean, it was, and we didn't have surround sound.
Yeah, we didn't have surround. I'm still working on that.
So
I had to replace my audio receiver.
I completely disagree with that stance. I think you can still capture that in. Yeah,
I agree with you. I believe you can too. And stuff. And that's where I watch 90% of my movies. it's the occasional ones like this, these one-offs from like, I'll go out there and venture. I maybe see
You don't
5
have to
movies.
defend your choice. I mean,
you know,
because
in the theater.
at the end of the day, it's personal preference. Like I chose not to go to the theater, not because I feel like the home theater is a better experience. It's a better experience for me.
No, I'm not even
Yeah.
saying that. I'm just saying I agree with you for both ways. Home is the best place to be at. For the most part, and they need to adapt to that better. And then for me personally, there's a one-off every once in a while like this that I'll go outside of that, but it's a rarity even for me to go outside of that. So, but that's okay. I'm glad they're offering both options.
I am too.
Yeah. That stuff. It's a good thing for everybody, I think, and stuff. But this, especially for movies like this that are so epic. I mean, still one of the things that I really, really, really enjoy about this movie, is the epic scale of it. You still get like the kind of intimate story of him kind of figuring out who he is, but then you get like these huge battles, like when the Harkonnens, attacked Arrakis, Arrakeen, and went to destroy the Atreides. That fight was awesome. I mean, so you get a lot of that. You get the intimate story, but I thought there was a good balance between that and kind of like what people would call the Star Wars stuff going on.
Right,
a little
big
bit.
action set pieces.
I-
Because
the
in the
action
book,
set
there
pieces.
isn't that many big action set pieces.
Mm-mm.
Fights are like one sentence long. They're not like really detailed.
Yeah, like the bigger fights that take place in the book in a longer period of time is that fight he has with Jonas at the end of the movie.
Right.
Like they did kind of make it a little bit longer in the film.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, you're absolutely right. Like a lot of things, they don't take 20 pages. The Fall of Arrakeen didn't. I mean, it took pages, but the Fall of Arrakeen itself didn't take that much.
Right. It wasn't the focus of the story.
No,
It
the
wasn't an
focus was
action.
him
Yeah.
getting away out with his mom
Right.
into the desert and them finding the Fremen.
I do
What
think
I-
they underdid the shields a bit because they had like a whole bunch of. Is one thing I was noticing on the second watch is that like they had this whole thing about the shields. They made a big deal. They kind of made a big deal about it. But then like later on when they had like Duncan defending the hallway and everything else like that, he's not using like the choreography felt like it was just very straightforward, fast, knife choreography. It wasn't really like he was.
Yeah, it wasn't that fast, slow.
Yeah, it wasn't really using fast, slow. It looked pretty. I mean, it was
noticed that as
good,
well.
but it wasn't like it didn't felt like it was in universe. It felt like it really was a. We're gonna have these guys fight and stab each other, and they're stabbing each other at full speed. And I'm like, and then we'll just come in and post and add red on the kill shots. And I'm like, that doesn't. I was like, okay. I mean, it's a nitpicky thing.
It's a nitpicky thing. And I've got a couple of, but no, what I would hope this film does is that it would encourage people to explore the universe and explore other hard sci-fi too, because Herbert is hard sci-fi, and I really hope that this starts kind of like this, the same effect that Lord of the Rings had. I mentioned it once already, but I really hope that's what this film can accomplish, is it just builds that interest again in hard sci-fi.
And I hope the foundation doesn't pull away from that from people.
I don't think it will, because it's not on a big enough streaming service.
I say that, hoping that it is high sci-fi, but the way that they've done it, it's not.
I think it's.
I'm totally canceling my Apple TV. Like I'm canceling the Apple TV service. It's not even worth it.
Yeah, and I think because it's on such a not necessarily a big streaming service, I don't think it's going to have that impact. I don't think it's going to. It's like, I guess it won't negatively impact what Dune starts. What I say.
No.
I don't think it's going to play, because I talk to anyone. I don't think half the people I know would be like, Foundation what? I mean, it's on Apple TV. What are you talking about?
Right.
Yeah. True.
Unless they're really into sci-fi like us, it's like,
or they've seen it and they're like, no, I'm not getting yet another streaming service.
Well,
Right.
and even for $5, I still kind of sometimes feel a little ripped off with as
The-
little as
the-
shows on that platform.
The only reason that we have Apple TV is because we have Apple's One Plus plan that gives us the Apple TV and all this photo backup and Apple Music,
Oh,
which
yeah.
we actually use.
They
That's
got
the
you with
only
a
reason
bundle.
we have Apple TV. It's
Yeah.
because it's bundled in with our service, and that's the only way that it's cheap. So
Yeah.
Yeah,
I basically got I've got it for Foundation. I was hopeful, but I'm not anymore. I mean, they could surprise me with the end of the season, but I'm not.
you don't want to watch C?
Yeah, no. That premise does
Much
not.
as I like
Someone's got to come
Momoa.
back. Yeah, someone's got to come back and say, "Hey, actually, it's good, and here's why." And I'd be like, "All right, if you can convince me, I'll watch it." But right now, the premise and everything, I'm like, "No, that doesn't make any damn sense."
Yeah.
That's awesome. Anyways, is there anything else you guys want to bring up on this cast?
There's so much, like, it almost feels like we should do another cast on it. Because now we've talked about some of these aspects and some of these things that we want to get off our chest, but there's still so much more you could talk about. We've barely touched the cast. Like, we've barely touched what they can do. We've barely touched maybe some of the cinematography. We've talked about it in broad, overarching terms, but I think there's just so much. It almost feels like we need a second cast to talk about it.
Well, I don't know if a whole cast of just gushing is going to be that. listenable,
That's
but, you know,
true. Yeah. But-
you kind of want insights, or you want something interesting to kind of latch onto. For
Yeah,
subject
and
matter.
I think we could probably maybe get
Yeah,
more
we
of
might
that,
be able
but,
to do that.
But I think for right now, I'm good.
Well,
Yeah,
that's okay. I'll probably try to sneak this Dune into one of our suggestions for the regular podcast episodes.
That works.
That would work. And I agree. We could touch on how, one thing that we're talking about with Pete, is who I went and saw it with, is that I couldn't say that anybody in this movie let me down in the way that they acted these parts.
Yeah.
I feel like everybody was cast very well. I didn't feel like anybody was an odd man out on what they were doing. I think Denis Villeneuve did a very good job at choosing the right people for the right job. So, anyways, that's one thing I can absolutely go. Before we get off, like what you were saying, is that one of the best things about this movie is the cast. One of the best things is how it's just so ridiculously well shot. And it's just beautiful. Every moment of this show of this movie is just so well directed, in my opinion. Aside from some of the little nitpicks we've had of, well, he didn't bring this up, or he took this little plot point out, or he didn't explain. There was a couple spots I'm like, he didn't explain that very well. It's, like I had to nitpick a part where Jessica and Paul were talking about, the Kwisatz Haderach after he had been tested with the Gum Jabbar. The way that she explained all of that, I'm just like, well, it's a little bit more than that, but it didn't take away from my viewing. It didn't take away from anything. These are nitpicks, but the overall movie was amazing, in my opinion, and stuff.
So
I
ratings?
enjoyed it very well, very much so.
I'm good.
What's that?
So
We're
ratings.
good for ratings.
Let's go for the ratings. John, go ahead and go first, man.
I'd watch this with my mom, but she'd have a set of rules before we watch it. Like, don't talk to me, don't ask me questions. Like, just enjoy the film, and then you can ask questions afterwards, so you don't miss anything. Because she would stop and ask questions, and that's fine. But it's like you're gonna miss things, so just watch it and then hold on to your questions.
Oh, that's why that's why you watch it at home, so you can just pause it. And
No,
then
but
watch
the-
one time with you, one time with her.
But some of these questions that get answered later on in the film, you just have to be a little patient. So I mean,
True.
that's where I'd be like, no, let's just hold off. And if you're still confused about something at the end of the film, then we can talk through it. And if there's confusion that lingers so badly that it screws up the film, well, then it's something to evaluate on the film. Like, okay, did the
That's
film
true.
just not do a good job with it? So
All right.
Very good point.
Yeah. that's my stance.
Okay. I guess I'll go next. I am giving this a 9 out of 10 sandworms.
right.
Pooping spice and stuff. And I will own this the second it comes out on Blu-ray. I absolutely adored this movie and stuff. It was amazing in my opinion, and I wanted to see it again, just to take in more and more of the grandiosity of this movie. I really liked it a lot. Kurt, what was your take?
I'll give this a 9 out of 10 missing pugs.
Missing,
but because there's a pug in the original Lynch movie. That's
oh
with him
yeah,
all the time. There's none in this one. I'm like that's a point off just for not having the puppies in there. No, it'll be a 10 out of 10 if we get a part 2 that lives up to it. But right now it's a 9 out of 10.
Yeah, I actually could go right along with you on that one. And stuff. If we get another one, I would definitely move that to a 10 as well.
Yeah.
It was just an amazing experience, and it was everything I wanted to more. And one thing we didn't say is some of the scenes he even expanded, like the scenes on Caladan and stuff like that.
Right.
And I really thought that even though they're not in the book necessarily, I really thought they felt
What's
felt
not in
like
the
a
book?
part of the movie. And really showed of what the contrast between his life, because I think of this movie as the coming of age of him from going from child to man, and then the next one might be from man to Messiah,
right?
And anyways, I really liked I liked the contrast, it was kind of like a contrast that George Lucas was trying to do, and between all his movies, where you had Star Wars, and then the next one was on a winter planet. Then the next one was on a green planet. That kind of a phenomenon he did.
Right.
Stuff. So anyway, well, guys, this was awesome. I'm glad we do this. If anything that comes up in the future that we feel like is podcast worthy, we should do this again on movies. I enjoy doing it about new movies as well. If we ever find one that we all want to do it on, I think this is a great thing. And if anybody's out there that has a chance to go see this movie, I don't think you'll be disappointed. If you're really into sci-fi or anything like that, I think this is something that you'll really like a lot and stuff. Just know that it is a slow burn. Just put that out there. It is definitely a slow burn movie,
but it is beautiful to look at.
Oh yeah,
even the
absolutely
slow parts.
Wonderful movie.
Yeah, well worth every minute.
Oh yeah, without a doubt. And thank you for being on the podcast, guys. It was enjoyable watching this and seeing this. Even though we weren't together this time, it was still amazing talking to it about you and with you, I should say. And to everybody out there listening, thank you for supporting our channel. And click the like button if you like what you heard here. Comment below if you have any comments you want to put on there, anything we said that maybe wasn't accurate, or just something you want to add to our conversation that we could talk about at a different time. And we always appreciate that. And as always, may you be excellent to each other and live long and prosper from all of us here at Josh's House of Nerd. Have a good night.
Thanks for watching. For more nerdy awesomeness, please like and subscribe and check out our other nerdy videos.